Hello, my dear friends, you're in the OFR News channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the Russia-Ukraine war. We have a lot of very interesting updates today about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, significant number of details, geolocations, and so on from the Ukraine battlefield update. So let's start with this Ukraine war situation report. U.S. and Ukrainian officials are discussing a possible visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to Washington this week, according to several sources familiar with the talks reported by CBS News. So this is about Zelensky's new announcement potentially. However, this trip will only take place if sufficient progress is made during peace negotiations scheduled in Geneva on Sunday, November 23, 2025, so the visit depends on negotiation results. The White House has stated there are currently no concrete plans for Zelensky's visit due to ongoing active diplomacy, so nothing is confirmed yet. Something like this. One of the options being considered at the Geneva talks includes a possible trip by U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll to Russia or negotiations with Russian representatives at a neutral location, so we see some diplomatic activity. The Geneva discussions focus on a controversial peace plan aimed at ending the conflict, which involves complex issues such as territorial concessions and military restrictions in this geopolitical analysis Ukraine. Now let's talk about Western weapons Ukraine losses, because the Albanese government of Australia has supplied Ukraine with Bushmaster-protected mobility vehicles valued at approximately $2.5 million each, so these are very expensive vehicles. These armored vehicles are praised for their high survivability and protection in combat. Despite their robustness, Russian forces have destroyed several Bushmasters during combat operations in Ukraine. The latest reports confirm that another Bushmaster has been destroyed by Russian forces, highlighting the ongoing intense fighting and attrition of such military assets on the battlefield. The Bushmasters have been a significant part of Australia's military aid to Ukraine, with over 120 vehicles delivered since 2022. These vehicles are credited with saving many Ukrainian lives and providing effective mobility and protection for troops. The destruction of these vehicles, however, is a reminder of the fierce and costly nature of the conflict. Videos circulated by Russian sources sometimes include taunts, illustrating the propaganda war accompanying the physical conflict. For example, Russian forces have mocked Australia regarding the destroyed Bushmasters, with messages like "Excuse me, mate, you can't park there," reflecting the ongoing psychological aspect of the war. Now let's move to a very interesting update about corruption in Western weapons Ukraine supply, because a Czech media investigation says a Prague-based company called Reactive Drone acted as an intermediary for Chinese drones to Ukraine, allegedly inflating prices roughly 20-fold and committing tax fraud in the process. So this is massive corruption scandal, something like this. Czech police and tax authorities are now pursuing the case, and the firm's director has reportedly been detained, while Ukraine's defense ministry has not publicly commented so far, so Ukrainians are silent about this scandal, which is very interesting. Let me give you details about what the scheme allegedly was. According to the report, Reactive Drone purchased Chinese-made drones for about $1.7 million and resold them to Ukraine for around $33 million, implying an extreme markup claimed to be about 20 times, so we are talking about 20 times markup, which is insane. The company was created shortly after Russia's full-scale invasion, SMO, apparently positioning itself as a rapid wartime supplier in a market where Ukraine urgently needed large numbers of small commercial-type UAVs, so they took advantage of war situation. Let's talk about financial and legal accusations. Investigators say the company failed to pay at least $5 million in taxes and routed significant sums to Chinese bank accounts, which raises suspicions of both tax evasion and possible money laundering, so very serious accusations. Czech authorities have reportedly detained the company's director and are investigating the accountant and related actors. The case is framed as part of a broader rise in fraud using chains of shell or front companies, something like this. Let me give you broader context for Ukraine about this situation. Ukraine's demand for drones is enormous, and Chinese commercial UAVs, especially DJI-type systems, have been central to both Ukrainian and Russian forces, but direct Chinese exports to Ukraine have been heavily restricted, which encourages use of intermediaries and raises price and corruption risks. And we have additional details about the Czech company scandal, because a Czech company named Reactive Drone has been accused of massively inflating the prices of Chinese drones sold to Ukraine in this Ukraine funding debate context. Over a period of 2 years, Reactive Drone reportedly bought drones from China for around $1.7 million and then resold them to Ukraine for $33 million, a price markup approximately 20 times the original cost. So once again we are talking about 20 times markup. The company also faces allegations of failing to pay at least $5 million in taxes, with accusations of transferring large sums of money to Chinese bank accounts, so tax evasion and money laundering accusations. Despite ongoing investigations into the company's operations, 2025 saw an expansion of this drone resale scheme, with larger quantities involved. There are claims that officials within the Ukrainian Defense Ministry are aware of the real prices of these Chinese drones but have not publicly addressed the issue, raising suspicions of collusion or complicity. This situation highlights concerns about profiteering and corruption involving military procurement during wartime, affecting transparency, accountability, and the efficiency of resource utilization in Ukraine's defense efforts related to U.S. military aid to Ukraine. Now let's talk about very tragic situation with children in Ukraine, because in 2025, Ukraine opened 161,500 cases of special investigation related to children, marking a fourfold increase compared to the previous year. So this is massive increase in investigations, something like this. This surge reflects the severe and growing impact of the ongoing conflict on children's safety, welfare, and rights across Ukraine, so children are suffering significantly. The substantial rise in investigations is driven by numerous factors including increased child casualties, displacement, abductions, trafficking, and exploitation. Many children have suffered from direct hostilities, bombings, and attacks on civilian infrastructure, leading to injuries, deaths, and psychological trauma. Additionally, children living in occupied territories face forced deportation, militarization, and indoctrination, further exacerbating their vulnerability, so the situation is very difficult for children in occupied areas. Humanitarian and child protection agencies report escalating risks like gender-based violence, recruitment of minors into armed groups, and exploitation in traffic contexts in this Ukraine war exposed reality. The wartime environment severely restricts access to social services and imposes lasting psychosocial stress on children, many of whom are displaced or separated from families, so long-term consequences for entire generation. And first we are going to talk about very important update in this Ukraine war update, because the Air Defense Forces of Ukraine successfully neutralized 125 out of 162 drones launched by Russia in a large-scale attack on the night of November 23 to 24, 2025. So this is massive Russian drone attack, something like this. The drones included over 80 Shahd UAVs as well as Herbera and other types, launched from multiple Russian regions including Koisk, Bryansk, Oral, Milorovo, Primorsko-Akhtarsk, and the temporarily occupied Crimea, so attack was launched from multiple directions in this Russia-Ukraine news today. Ukraine's defense repelled the attack through a coordinated response involving aviation, anti-aircraft missile troops, electronic warfare units, unmanned systems, and mobile fire groups, so we see that Ukraine air defense systems work very well, I would say. Despite the heavy interception, 37 strike drones managed to hit targets in 15 different locations, with falling debris recorded at an additional site, so not everything was intercepted, obviously. The most affected areas were civilian infrastructure facilities and private homes in the Kharkiv, Chernihiv, and Dnipropetrovsk regions in this Kharkiv direction update. The attack caused significant damage to these civilian areas and resulted in casualties among the population, including 4 deaths reported in Kharkiv from the strikes, so we see civilian casualties from these Russian airstrikes in Ukraine. This event underscores both the scale of drone warfare used by Russia and the considerable effectiveness of Ukraine's integrated air defense efforts in limiting the impact of such attacks on critical civilian infrastructure and population centers. The defense forces continue to rely on a multi-layered approach combining technology and ground response to counter similar threats effectively in this Ukraine war breaking news. Now let's move to the line of combat contact in this Ukraine frontline map update, and we are going to talk about Zaporizhia region. The Russian Defense Ministry has announced that Russian forces have liberated the settlement of Zatish in the Zaporizhia region, so this is new territorial gain from Russian side according to Russian MOD report. This liberation is part of a broader ongoing Russian offensive in the Zaporizhia Oblast, where Russian troops have been advancing and capturing multiple settlements in recent months, so we see systematic Russian progress in this direction. Zatish's liberation aligns with Russia's efforts to consolidate control over the region, which includes fighting for key villages and territorial gains that help strengthen their positions near the junction of Zaporizhia and neighboring oblasts. So this is about consolidating Russian positions, something like this. The progress in the Zaporizhia region is significant as it creates strategic advantages for Russian forces, including control over vital logistics routes and better positioning for further operations in line with Russian strategic objectives. Now let's move to very important update from Pokrov's battle, because the footage shows the liberation of the Shatursky and Gornyak neighborhoods in the city of Pokrovsk, so this is confirmation of Russian breakthrough in these areas. According to reports, Russian drone operators target enemy concentrations with precise strikes using their UAVs, so first they use drones to soften Ukrainian positions. Following these drone strikes, Russian assault troops enter the areas still under Ukrainian control to conduct clearance operations, eliminating remaining defenders and securing the liberated neighborhoods, so this is combined tactics, something like this. This combined use of drone-guided attacks followed by ground assault exemplifies Russia's current urban combat tactics in contested areas like Pokrovsk, where intense street-by-street fighting is ongoing between Russian and Ukrainian forces in this Ukraine frontline news. The drones provide valuable reconnaissance and attack capabilities to weaken Ukrainian positions prior to infantry advances, facilitating more effective and coordinated clearing of urban zones showing Russian strategic objectives. Now let's talk about security situation inside Russia, because Russian special services have eliminated 2 saboteurs in the Altai Krai region who were planning to derail trains, according to statements from Russian authorities and the investigative committee, so this is about sabotage operations inside Russian territory. Operational footage released shows the moment of apprehension, during which the criminals offered armed resistance, so there was armed confrontation. The saboteurs were reportedly coordinated by Ukrainian special services and intended to plant an improvised explosive device on railway tracks to disrupt transportation infrastructure, so Ukrainians are trying to disrupt Russian logistics, something like this. This incident is part of a broader pattern of sabotage and covert operations targeting critical Russian logistics and transportation routes. These acts aim to undermine supply lines and create operational difficulties for Russian military efforts. Sabotage operations such as these have become more frequent, with Ukrainian intelligence actively supporting covert actions inside Russia to disrupt military supply chains, including similar attacks on railways across key regions in this NATO escalation context. Now let's discuss Russian drone operations in this Ukraine war military analysis, because new footage released shows Russian armed forces UAV crews actively engaged in combat operations targeting Ukrainian forces, so this is about Russian drone warfare. These UAV operators belong to key Russian force groups labeled West, North, East, and Center, including the UAV teams of the 51st Guards Combined Arms Army and specialists from the elite Rubicon Center, so we have specific information about units involved. The footage illustrates how these drone teams systematically destroy Ukrainian military installations, armored vehicles, and personnel by conducting precise strikes and coordinated reconnaissance showing Russian troop movements and tactics. The Rubicon Center, in particular, is a notable drone warfare unit founded in 2024, specializing in integrating UAV operations with ground assaults to disrupt Ukrainian logistics and frontline formations, so this is a specialized unit for drone operations. This unit is reported to train hundreds of drone operators and instructors monthly, making it a formidable force against Ukrainian drone capabilities, something like this. The drone teams use a variety of UAV types, including FPV, first-person view, strike drones carrying powerful warheads, capable of hitting targets even under adverse weather conditions in these Ukraine drone attacks operations. Now let's discuss very interesting situation in Pokrov's battle update, because Colonel Valentin Manko, commander of Ukraine's elite assault infantry forces, claims that Ukrainian forces have managed to push back Russian troops and clear central districts of Pokrovsk, so this is Ukrainian version of events. He emphasizes that the Ukrainian armed forces have effectively cut off Russian logistics routes, making it extremely difficult for Russia to fully capture the city. Manko highlights active clearing and security operations with his troops engaging Russian saboteur and infiltration groups on the streets. But the thing is that in contrast, Ukrainian military commander Muchnoy provides a more pessimistic view, stating that there is no actual clearing of the city center and describes the fighting as pure hooliganism, so we see contradictory reports from Ukrainian side, something like this. He asserts that the city center is holding on by a thread because Russian forces are heavily entrenched, occupying buildings and defensive positions. Muchnoy also states that to advance even slightly, Ukraine would need to deploy at least 6 brigades, underscoring the difficulty and heavy fighting involved, so situation is very difficult according to this commander. Overall, the conflict in Pokrovsk is intense and dynamic in this Ukraine war deep analysis. Russian forces continue attempts to seize the city, while Ukrainian troops conduct fierce urban combat, block by block in this Donetsk fighting update. The contradictory accounts reflect the fog of war and differing regional perspectives within the Ukrainian military command, but both acknowledge the critical and hard-fought nature of the battle in Pokrovsk. The city remains a focal point of ongoing fighting with significant strategic importance for controlling the Donetsk region in this Ukraine war reality check.